At our 30th wedding anniversary, my wife took the microphone and announced, "This dance is for the man I have secretly loved for years." I stepped forward ready to hold her, but she walked right past me. She walked straight to my brother. And as the crowd cheered, I realized my life was a lie. But that was not the worst part. Later that night, my 12-year-old son pulled on my sleeve and whispered 5 words that turned my heartbreak into a fight for survival. "Daddy, do not drink the wine." My name is Victor Thorne. I am 70 years old, and if you looked at me standing in the ballroom of my Greenwich estate last Saturday, you would have seen a man who had everything. I was wearing a $5,000 tuxedo tailored to hide the fact that my shoulders have started to stoop a little with age. Around me, 200 of Connecticut's elite were drinking vintage champagne that I paid for, eating lobster canapes that I paid for, and laughing at jokes told by my younger brother Preston, which in a roundabout way I also paid for. You see, I have spent my entire life being the provider, the rock, the one who signs the checks and solves the problems. But as I stood there clutching a crystal flute of sparkling water, I felt less like a patriarch and more like a ghost haunting his own house. Before I tell you how my perfect life shattered in a single instant, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps more people hear this story, and maybe, just maybe, it will help someone else spot the snakes in their own backyard before it is too late. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. I am reading all of them from my new office overlooking the harbor, but we will get to that later. The night was supposed to be a triumph. 30 years of marriage to Lydia. She is 55, 15 years my junior, and still the most beautiful woman in any room she enters. When I met her, I was already a real estate tycoon, and she was an ambitious interior designer. Everyone whispered that she was after my money. I ignored them. I thought I was smart enough to know the difference between love and greed. I was wrong. The band leader tapped his baton, and the room went quiet. The lights dimmed, leaving only a spotlight on the center stage where Lydia stood. She looked radiant in a silver gown that shimmered like moonlight. She held the microphone with a trembling hand, and I saw tears glistening in her eyes. I felt a swell of pride in my chest. I thought, "Victor, you lucky old fool, she really loves you." My friends nudged me. "Go on, Victor, get ready," one of them whispered. I straightened my tie. I took a deep breath, preparing my own little speech about devotion and loyalty. Lydia spoke, and her voice was thick with emotion. She said, 30 years is a long time, but true love is not measured in years. It is measured in the moments when you feel like you are drowning, and someone reaches out a hand to save you. Tonight, I want to dedicate the first dance not to duty, not to obligation, but to the man who truly understands my soul. The man I have loved in silence for so long. My heart hammered against my ribs. I took a step forward. I had a smile plastered on my face, ready to accept her embrace. And then she walked. It happened in slow motion. She stepped off the small stage and moved toward me. I raised my hand slightly, but her eyes were not locked on mine. She was looking just past my left shoulder. She did not stop. She did not pause. She brushed past me so close that the silk of her dress whispered against my tuxedo pants. A cold draft hit me as she passed. I stood there, my hand half raised, frozen like a statue in a park. I turned slowly, following her path. She stopped in front of Preston. My brother Preston. The man who has never held a steady job in his life. The man whose gambling debts I have cleared 3 times to keep him out of prison. He was sitting at the head table holding a glass of scotch, looking bored. But when Lydia approached him, a slow smirk spread across his face. It was not a look of surprise. It was a look of ownership. Lydia extended her hand to him. Preston stood up, laughing softly, and pulled her into his arms. The band began to play a waltz. For 3 seconds, the room was deadly silent. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I felt naked, exposed, stripped of every ounce of dignity I had spent 70 years building. Then someone started clapping. Then someone else. Soon the whole room was applauding. I looked around in confusion. They were smiling. They were nodding. I heard a woman near me say, "Oh, how sweet. She is honoring his brother because of his illness. That is so noble of Victor to let them have this moment." Illness. What illness? Preston looked healthier than I did. I stood alone in the middle of the dance floor, a stranded island in a sea of tuxedos and gowns. My wife was in my brother's arms. Her head was resting on his shoulder. Her eyes were closed, and she looked peaceful in a way she never looked with me. Preston looked over her shoulder, and his eyes locked onto mine. He winked. It was a small gesture, a tiny twitch of the eyelid, but it hit me harder than a physical blow. That wink was not gratitude. It was a declaration of war. It said, "I have what is yours, brother, and you are too old and too stupid to do anything about it." I felt bile rise in my throat. I needed to get out of there. I needed air. I needed to scream. But the social training of a lifetime held me in place. Never make a scene, Victor. Never show weakness, Victor. Lydia finally pulled away from him and took the microphone again, breathless. She smiled at the confused crowd and said, effortlessly spinning the narrative, "As many of you know, my dear brother-in-law Preston has been battling a serious health condition in private. Victor and I decided that tonight we celebrate not just our marriage but the strength of family. We are all here for you, Preston." The crowd cheered even louder. A lie. A beautiful, plausible lie delivered with the grace of an Academy Award actress. I had not agreed to anything. I did not know Preston was sick. But if I spoke up now, if I shouted, "That is a lie," I would look like a jealous, petty old man ruining a touching family moment. They had trapped me in my own anniversary party. I turned and walked toward the bar at the back of the room. My hands were shaking so badly I had to clench them into fists. I felt a tug on my jacket. I looked down. It was Leo. My son, Leo. He is 12 years old, small for his age, with big dark eyes that always seem to be analyzing the world. He is a quiet boy. He prefers his books and his coding projects to the lavish parties Lydia loves to throw. I have always worried he was too soft for this world. Leo looked pale. He was looking at the dance floor where his mother was still holding Preston's hand, accepting compliments from guests. Then he looked at me. His lower lip was trembling. "Hey, champ," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do not worry about me. Your mother is just being dramatic as usual. Go get yourself some cake." I reached for a glass of red wine that was sitting on the high-top table next to me. It was a glass Lydia had handed to me specifically right before she went on stage. She had kissed my cheek and said, "Drink this, darling, it will help you relax for the speeches." I had set it down to clap for her entrance. I lifted the glass to my lips. I needed the alcohol. I needed to numb the sharp edge of humiliation slicing through my gut. Leo grabbed my wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong. "Dad, wait," he whispered. I looked down at him. "What is it, Leo?" He stood on his toes, pulling my ear down to his level. The music was loud, but his whisper cut through the noise like a siren. "Do not drink that wine, Dad." I frowned. "Why not?" Leo looked around, terrified that someone might be listening. He pulled me closer, his voice shaking with a terror no 12-year-old should ever know. I was in the kitchen behind the curtain. I saw Uncle Preston take the glass from the waiter. "He put something in it, Dad." It was a white powder from a little silver box. He stirred it with his finger, and then he gave it to Mom and told her to make sure you drink it all before the toast. I froze. The glass hovered inches from my mouth. The red liquid swirled innocently under the chandelier lights. I looked at the wine. I looked at my son. And then I looked across the room at my brother and my wife. They were clinking glasses, laughing with the mayor. Preston saw me watching. He raised his glass in a mock salute and pointed to the wine in my hand, nodding encouragingly. "Drink up, brother," his eyes seemed to say. I lowered the glass slowly. My heart, which had been breaking just moments ago, suddenly turned into a block of ice. "Are you sure, Leo?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. Leo nodded, tears spilling onto his cheeks. He said, "If you drink it, you will go to sleep and never wake up." And then he said, "We can be a real family." The glass in my hand felt heavy like a loaded gun. I looked at the liquid. I looked at the traitors celebrating my demise. And in that moment, the Victor Thorne who just wanted to be loved died. And the Victor Thorne who built an empire out of nothing returned. I put a hand on Leo's shoulder. "Stay close to me, son," I said. "And watch this." I walked toward a large potted orchid standing in the corner of the room. It was a rare species worth $5,000 a gift from a business partner. With my back turned to the room, I poured the entire glass of wine into the soil. Then I turned around, wiped my mouth with a napkin, and held up the empty glass. I caught Preston's eye and gave him a thumbs up. He smiled. It was the smile of a predator who thinks the trap has snapped shut. He had no idea that he had just declared war on the wrong man. I carried that glass of wine through the crowd like it was a loaded weapon. Every step away from the ballroom felt heavy. My heart was pounding against my ribs, not with the excitement of the anniversary, but with the cold dread of what my son had just whispered to me. "Do not drink the wine, Dad." The music faded behind me, replaced by the hollow silence of the hallway. I passed a mirror and saw my reflection. A 70-year-old man in a tuxedo holding a drink that might be his last. Was I losing my mind? Was I just a jealous old fool letting the imagination of a 12-year-old boy get the better of me? I reached my study and closed the heavy oak door behind me, locking it with a trembling hand. This room was my sanctuary. It was where I built my empire, where I signed the deals that put food on the table for 3 generations of Thorns. But tonight, it felt like a bunker. I walked over to the mahogany desk and stared at the glass of red wine. It looked so innocent. A rich, deep Merlot catching the light of the desk lamp. It smelled of oak and berries. Could my brother really hate me enough to kill me? We played catch in the backyard when we were kids. I paid for his first car. I paid for his second marriage. I bailed him out when his gambling debts threatened to break his legs. I looked at the orchid sitting on the corner of my desk. It was a rare species, a ghost orchid that I had imported from Florida for $5,000. It was delicate white and incredibly sensitive to its environment. My gardener told me that even tap water could shock it. It needed purified water and specific nutrients. It was the perfect test subject. "I am sorry, little one," I whispered. I tilted the glass. The wine poured into the soil with a soft glug. It soaked into the moss, darkening the roots. I emptied every last drop. Then I set the glass down next to the pot. I sat in my leather chair and waited. I do not know what I expected. Maybe I expected the plant to wither instantly like in a movie, but nothing happened. The white flowers stood tall. The green leaves remained firm. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. "See, Victor. You are paranoid. Leo is just a child with an overactive imagination. Preston is a leech, yes, but he is not a murderer. And Lydia, my beautiful Lydia. She might be unfaithful, she might be cruel, but she would not let him poison me. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe it so badly that I almost poured myself a scotch to celebrate my own stupidity. But I did not. I turned off the lamp and sat in the darkness, listening to the distant sounds of the party. I heard laughter. I heard the bass of the music. They were celebrating down there, celebrating my anniversary, celebrating my brother. I fell asleep in the chair, my neck crooked against the leather headrest. My dreams were disjointed and terrifying. I dreamed I was drowning in a sea of red wine while Lydia and Preston stood on a boat, pushing me down with oars. I woke up with a start. My neck was stiff. Sunlight was streaming through the heavy curtains, cutting through the dust motes in the air. The house was silent. The party was over. The guests were gone. I rubbed my eyes and sat up. I felt foolish. I had spent the night in a chair, terrified of a glass of wine. I reached for my glasses and put them on, ready to go upstairs, and apologized to Lydia for disappearing. Then I looked at the desk. My breath hitched in my throat. I froze. The blood drained from my face, leaving me cold and dizzy. The orchid was dead. But it was not just dead. It was obliterated. The delicate white petals, which had been pristine the night before, were now a sickly, translucent brown, hanging limp like dead skin. But the leaves were the worst part. They had turned a deep, violent black. They looked scorched, as if someone had taken a blowtorch to them. The stems had collapsed, turning into a mushy slime that oozed onto the polished wood of my desk. A chemical smell hung in the air. It was faint but distinct. It did not smell like wine. It smelled like bleach and burning rubber. I stared at the black sludge in the pot. My hands started to shake uncontrollably. This was not wine. Alcohol might kill a plant over a few days, but it would not turn it into black slime in 6 hours. This was acid, or a concentrated herbicide, or a poison so potent it attacked the cellular structure of a living thing instantly. If I had drunk that. The realization hit me like a physical punch to the gut. If I had taken that sip during the toast, I would not be waking up with a stiff neck. I would be lying in a morgue or frothing at the mouth on the ballroom floor while doctors tried to pump my stomach. Leo was right. My brother tried to kill me, and my wife handed me the glass. Tears pricked my eyes. Not tears of sadness, but tears of pure shock. The betrayal was so absolute, so total, that my brain could barely process it. They did not just want my money. They wanted me erased. They wanted me gone so badly they could not wait for nature to take its course. I stood up, my legs wobbling. I needed to call the police. I reached for the phone on my desk. I lifted the receiver. Knock, knock. The sound was soft, but in the silence of the room it sounded like a gunshot. I slammed the receiver down. "Victor, darling, are you in there?" It was Lydia. Her voice was sweet, melodic, the same voice she used when she asked for a new diamond necklace or a vacation to Paris. I looked at the dead orchid. I looked at the door. Panic surged through me. If she came in, if she saw the plant, she would know I knew, and if they knew I was a dead man. I was 70 years old. Preston was younger, stronger. If they realized the poison failed, they might try something else. A fall down the stairs, a heart attack in the shower. I had to hide it. I grabbed a stack of files and threw them over the orchid, hiding the black carnage. I grabbed the empty wine glass and rubbed the rim with my thumb, trying to make it look used. The doorknob turned. "Victor, why is the door locked?" Her voice had a sharp edge now, a hint of suspicion. I took a deep breath. I forced my heart to slow down. I was a businessman. I had negotiated deals with sharks and mobsters. I had looked liars in the eye and shaken their hands. This was the most important deal of my life, the deal for my survival. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. Lydia stood there holding a silver tray. On it was a plate of eggs Benedict and a fresh pot of coffee. She was wearing a silk robe, her hair perfectly messy. She looked like an angel, a beautiful, poisonous angel. "Good morning, Sleeping Beauty," she said, smiling. Her eyes darted instantly to the desk. She was looking for the glass. I stepped back, forcing a tired smile onto my face. "Good morning, my love. I am sorry about last night. The wine gave me such a headache I must have passed out in the chair. I saw her shoulders relax. She saw the empty glass on the desk. She thought I drank it. "You drank it all?" she asked, stepping into the room. "Every drop," I lied. "It was delicious. Just a bit strong." She set the tray down. Her eyes were gleaming with a strange excitement. She was waiting for me to collapse. She was waiting for the poison to kick in. "Well, you rest," she said, walking over to me and placing a hand on my chest. Her touch made my skin crawl. "Preston and I are going to handle the cleanup downstairs. You do not look well, Victor. You look pale. Maybe you should lie down." "I am fine, Lydia," I said, patting her hand. "Just old age catching up with me." She smiled, and it was the coldest thing I had ever seen. She kissed my cheek. "I will check on you in an hour," she whispered. She turned and walked out, closing the door softly. I waited until her footsteps faded. Then I turned back to the desk and lifted the files. The orchid lay there, a black, rotting mess, a silent witness to my murder. "I am not going to die today, Lydia," I whispered to the empty room. "And I am not going to lie down." I wiped the sweat from my forehead. The game had changed. I was no longer the husband. I was the target. And if I wanted to see the sunset tonight, I had to become something else. I had to become the best actor this family had ever seen. I walked down the grand staircase, gripping the banister to keep my hands from shaking. The house was quiet now, but the air still felt heavy with the lingering scent of stale perfume and expensive cologne. I found Lydia in the sunroom. She was sitting on the floral sofa, clutching a handkerchief, staring out at the manicured gardens. She looked fragile. She looked like a woman carrying the weight of the world. It was a perfect pose. If I had not just seen a ghost orchid turned into black sludge upstairs, I would have rushed to her side and begged for forgiveness. But now I saw the scene for what it was. A stage set. And Lydia was the lead actress in a tragedy written specifically to end my life. I cleared my throat. Lydia jumped slightly and turned to face me. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She had been crying, or at least she had done a very good job of irritating her eyes to look like she had been crying. "Victor," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You scared me." I walked into the room, keeping a safe distance. I needed to play this perfectly. I needed to be the confused, hurt husband, not the detective. "Lydia, we need to talk about last night," I said, keeping my voice low. "That dance. The way you looked at Preston. The way the whole room clapped while I stood there like a fool. You humiliated me, Lydia. On our 30th anniversary. Why would you do that?" Lydia stood up, her face crumpled. A tear rolled down her cheek with cinematic timing. "Humiliated you," she choked out. "Is that all you care about, Victor? Your pride, your reputation, your ego?" I frowned, feigning confusion. "My ego." "You announced you loved another man." "I announced I loved a man who is dying," she screamed. The words hung in the air like smoke. I froze. I let my mouth drop open slightly. This was the angle. This was the shield they were using. "Dying," I repeated. Lydia covered her mouth with her hand, struggling to suppress a sob. "Yes, Victor. Dying. Preston is dying. And you. You are so obsessed with your own image that you could not see the pain in his eyes. You could not see that he was saying goodbye." The door to the sunroom opened. Preston walked in. He was not wearing the tuxedo from last night. He was wearing a baggy sweater and sweatpants, clothes that made him look smaller, thinner. He walked with a slight limp that I had never noticed before. He was holding a large manila envelope. "Lydia, please," he said, his voice raspy and weak. "Do not tell him. I do not want his pity." Preston sank into the armchair opposite Lydia, letting out a long, pained groan as he sat down. He looked at me with eyes that seemed weary and defeated. I am sorry about last night, brother, he said. We did not mean to cause a scene. Lydia she got emotional. We just wanted one last happy memory before the end. I looked from Lydia to Preston. The performance was flawless. If I did not know about the poison, I would be on my knees right now. But I had to act as if I was on my knees. I had to let them win this round. What is it? I asked, softening my tone. What is wrong with you, Preston? Preston sighed and tossed the manila envelope onto the coffee table. It slid across the glass surface and stopped right in front of me. Pancreatic cancer, he said quietly. Stage 4. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months, maybe less. I reached out and picked up the envelope. I opened it slowly. Inside were medical records, scans, and letters from specialists. I glanced at them. They looked official. There were MRIs showing dark masses. There were blood test results highlighted in red. It was a masterpiece of forgery. Or maybe he really had bribed a doctor. With my money, nothing was impossible. I looked up at Preston. I forced tears into my own eyes. It was not hard. I just had to think about the boy Leo crying in his room. Oh my God, I whispered. Preston, why did you not tell me? Because I know you, Preston said, looking away. You would have tried to fix it. You would have thrown money at it. You would have sent me to specialists in Switzerland. But there is no fixing this, Victor. It is over. I just wanted to live my last days with some dignity. Lydia rushed over to him and knelt by his chair, holding his hand. He is all alone, Victor, she said, looking up at me accusingly. He is living in that cold apartment downtown with no one to cook for him, no one to make sure he takes his medication. Last night, when I saw him sitting there, looking so brave, I just broke down. I love him, Victor. I love him as a brother, and I cannot bear the thought of him dying alone. The guilt trip was working. Not on me, but on the character I was playing. They were painting me as the villain, the unfeeling tycoon who cared more about a dance than his brother's life. It was brilliant. It was a trap designed to make me open the gates of my fortress. I put the medical records down. I took a deep breath. I rubbed my face with my hands, letting out a shuddering sigh. I am so sorry, I said, my voice cracking. I had no idea. I thought you were mocking me. Preston laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Mocking you. Victor, you are the successful one. You are the patriarch. I am just the failure who is checking out early. Why would I mock the king in his own castle? Lydia stood up and walked over to me. She placed her hands on my shoulders. Her grip was firm. Victor, she said, her eyes locking onto mine. We need to do the right thing. We cannot let him go back to that apartment. He needs family. He needs us. I knew what was coming. I knew exactly what they wanted. And I knew I had to say yes. If I said no, they would find another way to get to me. If I said yes, I could keep them where I could see them. I could watch them. I could record them. What are you proposing, Lydia? I asked. He should move in here, she said. Into the East Wing. It is quiet there. We have the staff to take care of him. We can make his last months comfortable. It is the least we can do, Victor, after everything. I looked at Preston. He was staring at the floor, playing the reluctant martyr. I do not want to be a burden, Preston mumbled. Victor values his privacy. I do not want to intrude. Oh, stop it, Preston, I said, injecting authority into my voice. You are my brother. You are a thorn. Thorns do not die alone in rented apartments. I walked over to him and put a hand on his shoulder. I felt him tense up slightly beneath the wool sweater. You are moving in today, I declared. I will send the driver to pick up your things. You will stay here until the end. Preston looked up at me. His eyes were wet. Thank you, Victor, he whispered. You are a good man, better than I deserve. Lydia sobbed openly now, rushing to hug both of us. It was a grotesque family portrait. The victim, the murderer, and the adulteress, all hugging in a sunlit room. "I need a moment," I said, pulling away gently. This is a lot to process. I am going to go to the kitchen and tell the chef to prepare a special dinner. We should celebrate. Celebrate that we are together." I turned and walked out of the sunroom. My legs felt heavy as lead. I had just invited my assassin to sleep under my roof. I had just given them access to my food, my medicine, my daily routine. I was walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers. I reached the end of the hallway, where a large decorative mirror hung on the wall. The angle of the mirror allowed a view back into the sunroom through the open double doors. I paused. I could not help myself. I needed to see them one last time before I fully committed to this dangerous game. I looked into the glass. Lydia was standing over Preston. She was no longer crying. She was wiping her face with a tissue, checking her makeup. Preston was leaning back in the chair, his pain completely gone. He stretched his arms over his head like a man who had just won the lottery. Then he looked at Lydia. He reached out and squeezed her hand. And then he did it. He looked at the empty doorway where I had just exited. He thought I was gone. He thought I was halfway to the kitchen. He looked at Lydia and winked. It was slow, deliberate, and filled with malice. Then he grinned, a wide shark-like grin that showed all his teeth. He mouthed 2 words to her. "Too easy." Lydia giggled, covering her mouth. I stood there in the hallway staring at their reflection. A cold chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. They thought I was the stupid old man. They thought I was the mark. They thought it was too easy. I straightened my back. I adjusted my cuffs. "Enjoy your victory lap, brother," I thought. "Because once you move into this house, you are not the hunter anymore. You are the prey. And this house is my jungle." I turned away from the mirror and walked toward the kitchen. I had a dinner to plan, and I had a war to win. The invasion of my home happened not with soldiers kicking down doors, but with a single man in a bathrobe demanding espresso. Preston did not just move into the East Wing. He spread like a virus through the entire estate. By the 3rd day, the atmosphere in the house had shifted from a quiet sanctuary to a chaotic stage play where I was forced to be a silent spectator. I walked into the dining room for breakfast and stopped dead in my tracks. Preston was sitting at the head of the table. My seat. The seat where my father sat and where I had sat for 40 years. He was reading the Wall Street Journal, my subscription, and he had tucked a linen napkin into the collar of his silk pajamas. He looked up as I entered and did not even flinch. He did not offer to move. He simply folded the paper and smiled a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Good morning, brother," he said, gesturing to the empty chair on the side. The chair usually reserved for guests. "Maria made excellent crepes today. You should try one before I finish them all." I looked at Maria, my housekeeper of 20 years. She was standing by the sideboard pouring coffee. She kept her head down, refusing to meet my eyes. I could see the tension in her shoulders. Preston had been ordering her around like a servant from a bygone era, snapping his fingers when he wanted a refill, criticizing the temperature of the toast. I wanted to walk over there, grab him by his silk collar, and throw him out the front door. But I swallowed the rage. I pulled out the guest chair and sat down. "I am glad you are comfortable, Preston," I said, picking up a fork. "Comfortable," he scoffed. "I am dying, Victor. But yes, the thread count on these sheets helps a little. Speaking of help, I told the gardener to cut down those hedges near the pool. They block the view. I hope you do not mind." I gripped the fork so hard my knuckles turned white. Those hedges were planted by my late mother. "Of course," I said, forcing my voice to remain even. "Whatever makes you happy in your final days." He smirked. He was testing me. He was pushing every button I had to see if I would snap. If I lost my temper, if I yelled at a dying man, I would be the villain. Lydia would take his side. The world would see a heartless monster. So I ate my cold crepes, and I smiled. That afternoon, I put my plan into motion. I told Lydia I was going to the library to nap. Instead, I went to the storage closet in the basement. I dug through old boxes until I found it. A vintage teddy bear, one I had bought for Leo when he was a baby, but he had never liked it because of its glass eyes. They were dark and unblinking. Perfect. I took the bear to my workbench. My hands, which everyone assumed were shaking with age, were steady as a surgeon's. I carefully cut open the seam on the bear's back. Inside, nestled among the stuffing, I placed a high-definition spy camera I had purchased online using a prepaid debit card. It was no bigger than a matchbox, but it had a battery life of 48 hours and transmitted directly to a secure cloud server. I sewed the bear back up. I placed the camera lens right behind the bear's left eye. I waited until Preston went downstairs for his afternoon tea with Lydia. I slipped into the east wing. The room smelled of him already. Stale cigar smoke and cheap aftershave trying to mask the scent of sweat. The bedside table was cluttered with pill bottles, OxyContin, morphine, chemotherapy blockers. It looked like a pharmacy. I placed the teddy bear on the high shelf of the bookcase facing the bed and the bathroom door. It looked like a forgotten decoration, a relic of the house's history. "I am watching you, brother," I whispered. I retreated to my study and locked the door. I opened my tablet and logged into the secure app. The feed was crystal clear. I could see the bed. I could see the bathroom. I waited. Hours passed. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across my desk. Finally, the door on the screen opened. Preston walked in. He was not limping. He was walking with a bounce in his step. He closed the door and locked it. Then he did something that made my blood boil. He walked over to the mirror and flexed his biceps, admiring himself. He laughed softly. Then he went to the bedside table. He picked up the bottle of pain medication, the strong stuff that was supposed to manage the agony of stage 4 cancer. He shook 2 pills into his hand. I leaned closer to the screen. Was he actually sick? Was I wrong? He threw the pills into his mouth. He grabbed a glass of water, and then he spit them out into the cup. He walked into the bathroom. The camera angle was perfect. I watched as he poured the dissolved pills into the toilet. He flushed. He watched the water swirl away, taking his sickness with it. He came back into the bedroom and pulled a cell phone from under his mattress. Not his regular phone, a burner phone. He dialed a number and put it on speaker as he changed his shirt. I turned up the volume on my tablet. "Yeah, it is me," Preston said. A voice on the other end answered, rough and impatient. "You are late on the payment, Thorne. My boss is getting tired of waiting. You owe us 50 grand. "Relax," Preston said, chuckling as he buttoned his shirt. "I told you the plan is in motion. I am in the house. The old man bought the cancer story hook, line, and sinker. He is treating me like a king." "When do we get our money?" the voice demanded. "Soon," Preston said. "Listen, the old man is fading. He is weak. His mind is going. I am working on the wife now. She is eating out of the palm of my hand. Once he kicks the bucket, and trust me, it will be sooner rather than later, I will have control of the estate. You will get your 50 grand plus interest." "Make it quick," Thorne the voice warned, "or we will come and collect from your kneecaps." Preston hung up and threw the phone onto the bed. He let out a long sigh. Then he looked at the ceiling and said loud enough for the empty room to hear, "Die already, Victor. You have lived long enough." I sat back in my chair. The evidence was irrefutable. He was not sick. He was in debt to loan sharks. And he was planning to find them back with my life insurance. My hands were trembling, but this time it was not fear. It was pure, cold adrenaline. I needed to secure my assets. I needed to make sure that even if they killed me tonight, they would not get a dime. I stood up and walked over to the wall behind my desk. I moved the large oil painting of the Connecticut coastline, revealing a hidden wall safe. This safe contained everything: the deeds to the properties, the bearer bonds, the emergency cash, and most importantly, the original copy of my will. I reached out to punch in the code. My birthday. Simple. But before I could touch the keypad, I froze. The small LED light on the safe panel was blinking. Not green. Not off. It was blinking a rapid, angry red. I stared at it. That light only appeared when someone had entered the wrong code 3 times in a row. The system was in lockout mode. Someone had been here. Someone had found the safe. And someone had tried to guess my combination. I looked at the keypad. There was a faint smudge of powder on the number 7 and the number 0. My birthday was the 7th of October. They knew. They were close. They were not just waiting for me to die. They were actively trying to rob me while I was still breathing. I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my study. Slow, deliberate footsteps. They stopped right in front of my door. The doorknob turned slowly. Locked. "Victor, are you in there?" It was Preston. His voice was back to the weak, raspy whisper of a dying man. I looked at the safe. I looked at the tablet showing the empty room where the real Preston had just been gloating. And then I looked at the door. The wolves were not just at the gate. They were inside the walls. And they were hungry. Living with the enemy changes the way you see the world. Every shadow looks like a threat, and every silence feels like a trap. But the hardest part was not watching my brother parade around in my bathrobe or seeing my wife fawn over him. The hardest part was watching my son. Leo had stopped being a child. In the span of 3 days, he had become a ghost in his own home. He walked softly on the floorboards, as if afraid to make a sound. He kept his eyes on the ground. And whenever Preston entered the room, Leo would flinch. It was a small movement, a tiny involuntary contraction of his shoulders, but to a father watching closely, it was a scream for help. I sat in the living room, pretending to read a book, but my eyes were fixed on the reflection in the window. Preston was standing by the fireplace and Leo was sitting on the rug doing his homework. "Straighten your back, Leo," Preston snapped. I froze. The tone was not the playful teasing of an uncle. It was the sharp command of a drill sergeant. Or a father. Leo immediately sat bolt upright, his face pale. "And hold the pen correctly." Preston continued, walking over to the boy. "How many times do I have to tell you? Weak grip means a weak mind." Preston reached down and adjusted Leo's fingers on the pencil. He lingered there, his hand resting on the back of Leo's neck. It was a possessive gesture. Dominant. Creepy. It was the way a man touches something he owns. Leo did not move, but I saw tears welling up in his eyes. That was the moment the ice in my veins turned into fire. Uncles do not care about pen grips. Uncles do not discipline with that kind of intensity. Uncles do not look at their nephews with that mixture of pride and contempt. I needed to know. The question had been gnawing at the back of my mind since the night of the party, but I had pushed it away because it was too painful to face. But I could not ignore it anymore. I waited until Preston went out to the terrace to smoke one of my imported cigars. I slipped upstairs to the east wing. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not out of fear of getting caught, but out of fear of what I was about to do. I walked into the bathroom Preston was using. The air was thick with the humidity of a recent shower. I saw his toothbrush sitting in a porcelain cup, a blue plastic handle with frayed bristles. I pulled a Ziploc bag from my pocket. I felt like a criminal in my own home. I picked up the toothbrush, avoiding the bristles, and dropped it into the bag. I sealed it tight. Step 1 complete. Next, I went to Leo's room. He was not there. He was still downstairs, enduring Preston's torment. I walked over to his bed. His pillow was covered in a Spider-Man pillowcase. I looked closely. There. A few strands of dark hair caught in the fabric. I carefully used a pair of tweezers to pick them up, making sure to go out the follicle, the root where the DNA lives. I placed them in a separate envelope. I drove to the private laboratory myself. I did not trust a courier. I paid 3 times the normal rate for an expedited rush service. The technician, a young woman with tired eyes, told me she would email the results as soon as the sequencer was done, no matter what time it was. I returned home and locked myself in my study. The waiting was agony. To distract myself, I opened my laptop and logged into my bank accounts. I needed to see how deep the rot went. At first glance, the main accounts looked normal. The balance was high. The large transfers were all accounted for. But I was not looking for the large transfers anymore. I was looking for the termites. I dug into the sub-accounts, the operating expenses for the estate, and the miscellaneous cash funds. And then I saw it. 2 days ago, a withdrawal of $9,000. 3 days ago, $9,500. Yesterday, another $9,000. My blood ran cold. This was a classic money laundering technique known as smurfing. Banks are required to report any transaction over $10,000 to the federal government. By keeping the withdrawals just under that limit, Preston and Lydia were draining my liquidity without triggering any automatic alarms. I scrolled back further. This had not started when Preston moved in. It had started 6 months ago. Small payments to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Payments for consulting fees. Payments for interior design supplies. I did the math in my head. They had already siphoned off nearly $500,000. They were not just killing me. They were gutting me first. They were stealing the golden eggs before they killed the goose. I slammed the laptop shut. The rage was suffocating. I wanted to march upstairs, kick down the door, and drag Preston out by his hair. I wanted to scream at Lydia until her perfect facade cracked. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed the final piece of the puzzle. Time seemed to stop. The house grew quiet as night fell. I heard the grandfather clock in the hall chime midnight. Then 1 a.m. Then 2 a.m. I was sitting in the dark, the only light coming from the glowing Apple logo on my computer. My phone buzzed on the desk. One new email. Sender Helix Genetics Lab. Subject paternity test results. Case number 89204. My hand hovered over the mouse. I felt sick, physically sick. I looked at the family photo on my desk. Me holding Leo when he was a baby. He had been so small, so fragile. I remembered the first time he said Dada. He had looked right at me. If I opened this email, that memory might become a lie. But I had to know. I clicked open. The document was a PDF. I scrolled past the technical jargon, the charts of alleles and genetic markers. I scrolled all the way to the bottom to the summary section. There it was, in bold black letters that burned themselves into my retinas. Probability of paternity, 0.00% for Victor Thorne. Probability of paternity, 99.99% for Preston Thorne. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the desk so hard the wood creaked. Leo. My boy. The only good thing in my life. The only person who had tried to save me. He was not my son. He was the son of the man trying to kill me. I let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. It was a cruel cosmic joke. For 12 years I had raised my brother's child. I had paid for his school, his clothes, his toys. I had nursed him when he was sick. I had taught him to ride a bike. And all that time Lydia and Preston must have been laughing at me. The cuckold, the provider, the fool. I looked at the screen again. The numbers did not change. 99.99%. But then a strange clarity washed over me. I thought about Leo's eyes. I thought about the fear in them when Preston came near. I thought about the way Leo had whispered, "Do not drink the wine, Dad." Preston might be his father biologically. Preston contributed the DNA. But Preston was the monster under his bed. I was the one who read him bedtime stories. I was the one who put Band-Aids on his scraped knees. I stood up. The sickness in my stomach was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They thought this result would break me. They thought that if I found out, I would cast the boy aside like a piece of trash. That is what they would do. Because to them, people are just assets or liabilities. But they forgot one thing. I am a businessman, and when I see an asset being mishandled by incompetent management, I do not walk away. I take over. I deleted the email from my inbox and emptied the trash. I turned off the computer. Preston thinks he has a son, I whispered to the darkness. But by the time I am done with him, he won't even have a name. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark ocean. The waves were crashing against the rocks, relentless and powerful. Tomorrow, the war would end. But tonight, I had to make a promise. Not to myself, but to the boy sleeping down the hall. "You are my son, Leo," I said softly, "and God help anyone who tries to take you from me." I went back to my desk and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. I began to write. It was not a will, it was a script for the final performance. And in this play, the villain would not get a monologue. He would just get a trapdoor. The silence in my study was heavy and suffocating. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving only the cold, hard truth sitting on my desk. 0% probability. The numbers were black ink on white paper, but they looked like bloodstains to me. For 12 years, I had been living a lie. Every birthday party, every baseball game, every time I tucked Leo into bed and told him I was proud of him, I was playing a fool in a tragedy written by my wife and my brother. They had not just stolen my money. They had stolen my legacy. They had tricked me into raising another man's son, loving another man's blood, and building a future for a lineage that was not mine. I looked at the family portrait on the wall. The smiling faces mocked me. I grabbed a heavy crystal decanter from the sidebar and hurled it at the picture. The glass shattered with a deafening crash, sending shards flying across the room. The photo frame cracked down the middle, splitting my face from Leo's. I fell back into my leather chair, gripping the armrests until my fingers ached. A dark, primal rage began to boil in my gut. It was not the anger of a businessman who lost a deal. It was the fury of a wounded animal. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. My hand moved automatically to the false bottom where I kept my grandfather's Colt 1911. The metal was cold against my skin. It was heavy, loaded, and lethal. I pulled the slide back, checking the chamber. A full magazine. 7 bullets. 2 for the traitors upstairs, 1 for myself, and 4 left over for the devil when I met him in hell. The logic of violence took over my mind. It seemed so simple, so clean. Why play their games? Why wait for lawyers and courts? I could end it tonight. I could walk up those stairs, kick open the door to the east wing, and erase the smirk from Preston's face forever. I could watch the terror in Lydia's eyes as she realized her schemes had led to this final bloody moment. It would be justice. Old Testament justice. Eye for an eye. Life for a life. I stood up. The gun felt like an extension of my hand. I walked out of the study. The hallway was dark, the shadows stretching long and distorted on the walls. The house was silent, but in my head I could hear the roaring of my own pulse. I walked toward the stairs. My steps were heavy, deliberate. I was the angel of death, and I was coming to collect. As I reached the top of the landing, I turned toward the east wing. But my path took me past Leo's bedroom door. I stopped. I looked at the door. It was painted a soft blue, a color Leo had chosen himself. There was a small sign on it that said, "Leo's Lab, keep out." I remembered the day we put it up. He was 6 years old, giggling as I hammered the nail. He had looked at me with such adoration. "He is not yours," a voice in my head whispered. "He is Preston's. He has the blood of a snake running through his veins. He is a living reminder of your failure." I tightened my grip on the gun. I should hate him. I should look at him and see the betrayal. I should walk past this door and never look back. But then I heard a sound. It was a soft whimper, a sound of distress. I moved closer to the door, pressing my ear against the wood. "No, please." It was Leo. He was talking in his sleep. Do not hit me, Uncle Preston." My heart missed a beat. The rage that had been propelling me forward suddenly hit a wall. I held my breath, listening. "I won't tell. I promise. Just don't hurt Daddy Victor." The gun lowered in my hand. The barrel pointed at the floor. Daddy Victor. Even in his nightmares, even when his subconscious was replaying the trauma inflicted by his biological father, he was calling out for me. He was trying to protect me. I pushed the door open quietly. The room was dimly lit by a nightlight shaped like a rocket ship. Leo was tossing and turning in his bed, his sheets tangled around his legs. Sweat glistened on his forehead. He looked small and fragile. I walked over to the bed. I looked down at the boy. I looked for Preston in his face. I looked for the deceit, the greed, the malice. But I did not see it. I saw the messy hair I had ruffled 1,000 times. I saw the scraped chin from when he fell off his bike, and I caught him. I saw the boy who made me a father, not with biology, but with love. Preston might have provided the DNA, but Preston was the monster in the dark. I was the one who chased the monsters away. Leo let out another sob, his hands clutching the blanket. "Please, I want my dad." He did not mean the man in the East Wing. He meant the man standing beside him with a loaded gun. The realization hit me harder than the betrayal. Leo was a victim too. Perhaps the biggest victim of all. They had used him as a pawn. They had twisted his life, terrorized his spirit, and forced him to live a lie. If I killed them tonight, if I went to prison, or ended my own life, I would be abandoning him. I would be leaving him alone in a world that viewed him as nothing more than a tool. I would be letting Preston win. Because Preston did not care if Leo lived or died. But I did. I looked at the gun in my hand. It looked ugly now. Barbaric. It was the weapon of a weak man who had run out of options. I was not out of options. I was Victor Thorne. I built skyscrapers. I crushed competitors. I did not need bullets to destroy my enemies. I had money. I had power. And now I had the ultimate weapon. I had the truth. I reached out and gently placed my hand on Leo's forehead. "Shh, Leo," I whispered. "It is okay. I am here." Leo stirred at my touch. His breathing slowed. He leaned into my hand, seeking the comfort he had known his whole life. "Dad," he mumbled sleepily, his eyes fluttering open for a second. "I am here, son," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Go back to sleep. I am watching over you." He sighed a long, deep exhalation of relief and drifted back into a peaceful sleep. I stood there for a long time watching him breathe. The rage was still there, but it had changed. It had cooled. It had crystallized into something sharp and precise like a diamond. Hot anger makes you sloppy. Cold anger makes you brilliant. I tucked the gun into the back of my waistband. I would not use it tonight. Death was too easy for them. Death was an escape. They deserved to suffer. They deserved to watch everything they schemed for crumble to dust in their hands. They deserved to be stripped of their pride, their freedom, and their future. and I was going to be the architect of their ruin. I walked out of Leo's room and closed the door softly. I walked back to my study, but this time I did not look at the broken picture frame. I sat down at my desk and pulled out a fresh legal pad. I needed a plan that would protect Leo and destroy Preston and Lydia so completely that they would wish I had just shot them. I picked up my pen. My hand was steady. Step 1, I wrote. The power of attorney. I looked at the calendar. Thanksgiving was in 4 days. They wanted me to sign over my life. I would give them a signing ceremony they would never forget. I leaned back in the chair. The darkness of the room no longer felt suffocating. It felt like a cloak. I was the predator now hiding in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Sleep well, brother, I whispered, because when you wake up, your nightmare begins. The next morning, I told Lydia I was taking Leo fishing. I expected resistance. I expected her to say it was too cold, or that Leo had homework, or that Preston needed company. But she just smiled that tight plastic smile and said, "That sounds lovely, Victor. Make some memories." I knew what she was really thinking. She was thinking that this was the last trip. She was thinking that the old man wanted to say his goodbyes to the boy before he kicked the bucket. She probably had the champagne chilling for the moment our car pulled out of the driveway. I drove my old truck, not the luxury sedan. I left my phone at home. I patted Leo down playfully before we got in, pretending to check for ticklish spots, but really I was checking for trackers or listening devices sewn into his jacket. You can never be too careful when you are living in a nest of vipers. We drove in silence for 40 minutes until we reached a secluded spot on the Long Island Sound. It was a place my father had taken me, a place where the gray water met the gray sky, and the only sound was the cry of seagulls and the slap of waves against the hull of our small rented boat. We cast our lines into the water. Leo sat huddled in his puffer jacket staring at the bobber floating on the surface. He looked so small against the vastness of the ocean. He looked burdened. A 12-year-old should be worrying about math tests and baseball tryouts, not about survival. I reeled in my line a little and cleared my throat. The sound seemed to echo in the emptiness. Leo looked at me. He turned slowly. His eyes were fearful. He thought I was going to scold him. He thought I was going to ask why he was so quiet lately. "I am not going to ask you about school, Leo," I said, keeping my voice low and steady, carried only by the wind. "And I am not going to ask you about baseball. I brought you out here because this is the only place in the world right now where I know for a fact that no one is listening to us." Leo gripped his fishing rod tighter. His knuckles turned white. "I know you are scared," I continued. "I know things have been strange at home. But I need you to be brave for me, son. I need you to tell me the truth, no matter how bad it is, no matter what anyone told you to say." I leaned forward. "What does Preston say to you when I am not in the room?" Leo looked down at his boots. He was trembling. I could see the battle raging inside him. The fear of the monster versus the trust in the father. He says I have to be nice to him," Leo whispered. I waited. I did not push. I just let the silence stretch out, offering him a safe space to step into. "He says that you are old," Leo's voice cracked. "He says you are sick in the head. He says that soon you are going to go away to a hospital or to the cemetery. And he says that when you are gone, he is going to be in charge." I felt the anger flare up again, hot and sharp, but I pushed it down. I needed facts. "What else, Leo? What does he make you do?" Leo looked up at me and the tears started to spill over. "The dam broke. He makes me call him Dad," he sobbed. "He grabs my arm really hard right here." Leo rolled up his sleeve. On his upper arm there were 3 distinct bruises, finger marks, purple and yellow fading into green. He squeezes my arm and says, "Say it. Say hello, Dad." And if I do not say it, he squeezes harder. He says that he is my real father. He says you are just the bank account. I reached out and took Leo's hand. My heart was breaking, but my resolve was hardening into steel. He told me that if I tell you anything, if I try to warn you, he will send me to an orphanage. Leo cried, his whole body shaking. He said that since you are not my biological father, nobody will want me. He said he will sign the papers to send me to a state home where the big kids will beat me up every day. He said, I will never see my room or my toys or you ever again. The cruelty of it took my breath away, using a child's deepest fear of abandonment to silence him. It was evil, pure, unadulterated evil. I pulled Leo from his seat and hugged him. I hugged him tight, burying my face in his jacket. I wanted him to feel the strength of my arms. I wanted him to know that I was not a bank account. I was a fortress. Listen to me, Leo, I said, pulling back and holding him by the shoulders. I looked him dead in the eye. That man is a liar. Do you hear me? He is a liar and a coward. He can never send you away. You know why? Because I just signed the papers this morning. You are my son, legally, officially, forever. No judge, no court, and certainly no piece of trash like Preston can ever take you away from me. Leo sniffled, wiping his nose with his sleeve. Really? Really, I promised. But we have a problem, Leo. There are bad people in our house, and right now they think they are winning. They think I am weak. They think I am stupid. I took a deep breath. I need your help to stop them. I cannot do it alone. I need a partner. Leo straightened up a little. A partner? Yes. Like in those spy movies we watch. I have a plan to get them out of our lives forever. But it is a dangerous plan. And it requires you to be the best actor in the world. Can you do that? Leo nodded slowly. The fear in his eyes was being replaced by determination. He wanted to fight back. He just needed a general to follow. What do I have to do? He asked. I need you to pretend that you hate me, I said. Leo blinked. What? I need you to ignore me. I need you to stay away from me in the house. If Preston tells you to call him Dad, you do it. If Lydia tells you to go to your room, you go. You have to make them believe that you are on their side. You have to make them feel safe. Because when bad people feel safe, they make mistakes. And I paused, swallowing my pride. I am going to have to act too. Starting today, I am going to become very forgetful. I might call you by the wrong name. I might drop things. I might yell at you for no reason. Leo looked confused. Why? Because I want them to think I am losing my mind, I explained. I want them to think the poison is working. If they think I am already dying, they will stop trying to kill me. They will just wait. And while they are waiting, we will be setting the trap. I squeezed his shoulders. But no matter what I say in that house, no matter how crazy I act, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember that I love you, and that I am sane, and that I am coming for them. Can you remember that? Leo took a deep breath. He wiped the last tear from his cheek. He looked at me, and for the first time in days, I saw a spark of the old Leo, the smart, observant boy. I can do it, he said. I smiled. Good. Now let's catch a fish so we have an excuse for being out here so long. We drove back to the house in the early afternoon. As we turned onto the long driveway, I could see the silhouette of the mansion looming against the sky. It looked different to me now. It wasn't a home. It was a stage. I stopped the truck in front of the garage. I turned to Leo. Are you ready, Agent? I asked. Leo nodded. He put his mask on. His face went blank. His shoulders slumped. He looked like the scared, submissive boy Preston wanted him to be. I took a deep breath. I let my jaw go slack. I unfocused my eyes. I made my hands tremble slightly on the steering wheel. "Showtime," I whispered. We got out of the truck. Lydia was waiting on the porch holding a glass of wine. Preston was standing behind her, leaning against the doorframe, looking like the lord of the manor. "Did you catch anything?" Lydia called out, her voice dripping with fake cheer. I stared at her for a moment too long. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I blinked rapidly, as if I was trying to remember who she was. Catch what?" I mumbled, my voice shaky. Who are you looking for?" Lydia's eyes widened. She glanced back at Preston. Preston grinned. I stumbled a little as I walked up the steps. I dropped my car keys. "Oh dear," I said, staring at the keys on the ground, as if they were alien artifacts. I think I lost my way." I saw the look of triumph pass between Lydia and Preston. They bought it. They thought the end was near. I walked past them, shuffling my feet into the belly of the beast. The campaign had begun, and the old man they thought was helpless was about to take them all to school. The transformation from tycoon to invalid began in my closet. I stood there staring at the rows of Italian leather shoes and hand-stitched suits that had defined my image for 40 years. I reached past the Oxfords and grabbed an old brown loafer for my left foot. Then I reached for a white tennis sneaker for my right. I put them on. The height difference made me limp slightly, throwing my hip out of alignment. I looked in the mirror. I buttoned my shirt wrong, skipping the third hole so the collar sat askew, choking me slightly. I messed up my hair, which I always kept combed back with oil. I looked ridiculous. I looked like a man who had lost the map to his own body. It was humiliating. My pride, the armor I had worn since I was a poor boy in the Bronx, screamed at me to stop. But then I thought about the poison in the orchid. I thought about Leo's bruises. And I realized that dignity was a luxury I could no longer afford. Survival required a disguise. I walked downstairs. I exaggerated the limp, dragging my left foot across the hardwood floor with a rhythmic scuffing sound. Lydia was in the sunroom, drinking her morning coffee and scrolling through her phone, probably looking at real estate listings in Paris. I stopped in the doorway. I let my jaw go slack. I stared at her with a vacant, glassy look that I had practiced in the bathroom mirror for an hour. "Mother?" I said, my voice high and confused. "Mother, is the school bus here yet? I am going to be late for math class." Lydia froze. She lowered her phone slowly. She looked at my shoes. She looked at my buttoned wrong shirt. Then she looked at my face. For a second, I saw annoyance. She was about to snap at me to stop playing games. But then she saw the emptiness in my eyes. The annoyance was replaced by shock, and then slowly a dark, twisted delight spread across her features. "Victor," she said, standing up carefully. "I am not your mother. I am Lydia, your wife." I blinked rapidly. "Lydia? Who is Lydia? Where is my lunchbox?" Preston walked in at that moment. He saw me standing there looking disheveled and lost. He looked at Lydia. She gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "He is having an episode, Preston," she whispered loud enough for me to hear. "A bad one. He thinks I am his mother." Preston walked over to me. He stood too close, invading my personal space. He smelled of my cologne. He grinned. "Hey, sport," he said, mocking me. "The bus already left. You missed it. You have to stay home with us today." I shrank back from him, feigning fear. "I do not like you," I whimpered. "You smell like smoke." Preston laughed. He clapped a hand on my back hard enough to make me stumble. "The old engine is finally breaking down," he said to Lydia. "I told you." The stress of the anniversary pushed him over the edge. That night came the hardest part of the performance. We were seated at the dining table. The chef had prepared roast duck. I sat there staring at the food, holding my fork like a shovel. Leo was across from me, keeping his head down just like we practiced. I had strapped a plastic medical bag filled with warm water to my inner thigh hidden under my trousers. A small tube ran down my leg. It was a crude device, but it was necessary. I needed to cross a line. I needed to do something so socially unacceptable that they would have no doubt that Victor Thorne was gone. I waited until Preston was midway through a story about a business deal he had supposedly closed, and then I told them I demanded 50% up front. He boasted, waving his wine glass. I stood up abruptly. The chair screeched against the floor. I have to, I stammered. And then I released the clamp on the tube. The water flowed down my leg, soaking my trousers and pooling rapidly on the expensive Persian rug. The sound of liquid hitting the floor was unmistakable in the silent room. Lydia dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against her china plate. "Oh my God, Victor!" she shrieked, her face twisted in genuine disgust. Did you just urinate on yourself?" Preston burst out laughing, a cruel, barking laugh. "Jesus, Victor, he is like a toddler. Look at him. He is wetting himself at the dinner table." I stood there looking down at the puddle, letting my lip tremble. I felt a hot flush of shame rising up my neck. This was the man who had shaken hands with presidents. This was the man who had built skyscrapers. And here I was, standing in a puddle of fake urine, while my brother laughed at me. But I forced myself to hold the character. I made a spill," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I made a spill, Mommy." Lydia stood up, throwing her napkin on the table. "Get him out of here," she snapped at the maid. "Clean him up, and burn those trousers. I cannot eat like this. This is disgusting." As the maid led me away, I risked a glance at Leo. He was not looking at me. He was looking at Preston with a cold, hard stare. Good boy. He was staying in character, too. The next morning, the doctor arrived. Dr. Sterling. I knew of him. He was a concierge doctor for the wealthy in Greenwich, known for writing prescriptions for whatever his clients wanted, no questions asked. He had a shiny suit and a smile that looked like it was bought at a discount store. Lydia had clearly briefed him. He sat me down in the living room. Lydia and Preston stood behind him like vultures. "Hello, Victor," Dr. Sterling said, shining a penlight into my eyes. "I am just going to ask you a few questions. Can you tell me what year it is?" I stared at his tie. It was ugly. "It is 1985, I said confidently. "Reagan is in the White House." Dr. Sterling made a note on his clipboard. "And can you tell me who this woman is?" He pointed to Lydia. "That is the nurse," I said. "She steals my change." Lydia let out a gasp of indignation, but Dr. Sterling held up a hand. "Typical paranoia," he murmured. "Confusion of time and identity." He handed me a piece of paper and a pen. "Draw a clock for me, Victor. Put the hands at 3 o'clock. I took the pen. My hand shook. Instead of a circle, I drew a jagged square. I put numbers in random corners. 7, 12, 0. Dr. Sterling took the paper back. He looked at it and shook his head with feigned sadness. "It is advanced," he announced, turning to Lydia. "Rapid onset Alzheimer's, likely aggravated by a series of mini-strokes. The decline is precipitous. In my professional opinion, he is no longer capable of making decisions. He is a danger to himself and others." Preston stepped forward, trying to hide his excitement. "So, what does that mean, Doctor?" "Legally speaking, it means he needs a guardian," Dr. Sterling said. "He is incapacitated. If he were to sign a contract today, it would be void. But if you have power of attorney, you can manage his affairs for his own safety, of course." Lydia put a hand to her chest. "Oh, poor Victor. But we have to do what is best for him. Will you sign the affidavit, Doctor? I will have it ready by this afternoon," Dr. Sterling promised. I sat there slumped in the chair listening to them sign away my freedom. They were so happy. They thought they had won the lottery. They did not know that Dr. Sterling's diagnosis was the key to my trap. By declaring me incompetent, they were walking right into the line of fire. 2 hours later, the family lawyer, Harrison Graves, arrived. But this was not my trusted Harrison. This was the junior partner, a man Lydia had been cultivating. He looked at the medical report and nodded. "This is conclusive," he said. "We need to move fast. If the shareholders hear about this, the stock will tank. We need to transfer control quietly." "When can we do it?" Preston asked, pacing the room. "Thanksgiving is next week," the lawyer said. "It is a family holiday. It is natural for everyone to be together. We will organize a small ceremony here. Victor will sign the transfer of power of attorney to you, Lydia. We will frame it as a retirement due to health." "Thanksgiving." Lydia mused. A smile spread across her face. "It is perfect. We can have a big dinner. We can invite the board members to witness it. A celebration of Victor's legacy as he passes the torch." "Passes the torch." Preston laughed. "More like drops it in the mud." I was sitting in the corner playing with a piece of string I had found in my pocket. I looked up at them. "Turkey," I mumbled. "I like turkey." Lydia looked at me with pity that was really contempt. "Yes, Victor," she said. "You will get your turkey, and then you will go to bed and let the adults talk." I lowered my head to hide the spark in my eyes. Thanksgiving. The holiday of gratitude. I had a lot to be grateful for. I was grateful they were greedy. I was grateful they were arrogant. And I was grateful that they had set a date for their own execution. Next week at the Thanksgiving table, they expected a signature. Instead, they were going to get a revelation that would shatter their world. The turkey would not be the only thing getting carved up. Midnight came, and the house finally fell into a silence that felt heavy and suffocating. Lydia was in the master bedroom, probably dreaming of the yachts she would buy with my life insurance. Preston was in the east wing, likely high on the painkillers he did not need. I was supposed to be in the guest room, sedated and confused. But my mind was sharper than a diamond cutter. I dressed in the dark, putting on a pair of dark coveralls I used for gardening, and a wool cap pulled low over my eyes. I did not take my keys. The luxury cars in the garage were definitely tracked. Instead, I slipped out the kitchen door, avoiding the squeaky floorboard near the pantry, and made my way to the potting shed. Inside was an old beat-up Ford truck that the groundskeeper used for hauling mulch. It smelled of fertilizer and gasoline. It was perfect. I hotwired it, a skill I had learned growing up in the Bronx before I ever wore a tie. The engine coughed to life with a rumble that sounded too loud in the quiet night, but the wind coming off the ocean masked the sound. I drove with the headlights off until I hit the main road. 30 minutes later, I pulled into the salvage yard on the outskirts of the city. This was a place of rusted metal and broken dreams, a graveyard for machines. It was also the only place I knew where a conversation could not be recorded. The industrial crusher was running a rhythmic grinding noise that would scramble any long-range microphone. A black sedan was already parked in the shadow of a mountain of crushed cars. Harrison Graves stepped out. He was my real lawyer, not the puppet Lydia had brought to the house. Harrison was a man of few words and even fewer smiles. He looked at me in my coveralls and shook his head. "You look like hell, Victor," he said, his voice barely audible over the machinery. "I feel like hell, Harrison," I replied, spitting on the dusty ground. "But I am not dead yet. And I am definitely not crazy." We walked deeper into the yard, away from the road. I told him everything. I told him about the orchid. I told him about the paternity test. I told him about the smurfing from my accounts. Harrison listened, his face hardening with every sentence. He was a man who had seen the worst of humanity in divorce courts, but even he looked disgusted. "So they want to declare you incompetent," he asked, kicking a loose hubcap. Yes, I said. They have a doctor on their payroll. They are going to stage an intervention at Thanksgiving. They are going to force me to sign over power of attorney and then ship me off to a facility where I can rot quietly. Harrison took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. If they have a medical diagnosis, Victor, it is going to be hard to fight. Even if you walk into court and recite Shakespeare, they can claim it is a lucid interval. They have the momentum. I know, I said, reaching into my pocket. That is why we are not going to fight them in court. We are going to let them win. Harrison looked at me confused. Let them win. I pulled out a crumpled piece of paper covered in my handwriting. I want you to draft a new trust document right now tonight. I want it notarized and filed with the county clerk the minute the office opens tomorrow morning. We are going to call it the Phoenix Trust. I handed him the paper. He squinted at it in the dim light of the security flood lamps. What are the terms? He asked. It is a poison pill, I explained. My voice cold and steady. The trust will hold all my assets. Every property, every stock, every bond. And here is the trigger clause. If I, Victor Thorne, am declared mentally incompetent, or if I die under suspicious circumstances, the entire trust freezes immediately. Not a single cent goes to my wife or my brother. Instead, 100% of the liquid assets are automatically transferred to a charitable foundation for orphans, and the real estate is placed in a blind trust for the sole benefit of Leo Thorne to be accessed only when he turns 25. Harrison read the notes, his eyes widening. Victor, this is nuclear. If they sign that power of attorney thinking they are getting control of your empire, they will actually be triggering a mechanism that strips them of everything. They will be guardians of an empty vault. Exactly, I said, allowing myself a grim smile. They want to be in charge of my life. Fine. Let them be in charge. But the moment they take the wheel, the engine falls out. Harrison nodded slowly, a look of professional admiration on his face. It is brilliant, he said. Cruel, but brilliant. But Victor? What about the criminal charges? Fraud, attempted murder. I reached into my other pocket and pulled out a small black USB drive. This is the nail in the coffin, I said, holding it up. This drive contains 48 hours of footage from a camera hidden in Preston's room. It shows him faking his illness, destroying his medication, and conspiring with loan sharks. It also has the audio of Lydia agreeing to the plan. I pressed the cool metal of the drive into Harrison's hand. Do not use this yet, I commanded. I want you to come to Thanksgiving dinner. Bring the police, but have them wait outside. When I give the signal and you will know when it is, I want you to walk in. Harrison pocketed the drive. You are playing a dangerous game, Victor, he warned. If they figure out what you are doing before Thanksgiving. They won't, I said, cutting him off. Because as far as they know, I am just a drooling old man who wets himself at the dinner table. They are too arrogant to look down. And that is exactly how I am going to break their necks. We shook hands. His grip was firm, a lifeline in the chaos. Stay safe, Victor, he said. I watched him drive away, his taillights disappearing into the mist. I stood alone in the junkyard for a moment, listening to the violent crunch of metal being compressed nearby. It was a fitting sound. That was what was about to happen to my family. The pressure was building, and soon they would be nothing but scrap. I drove the old truck back to the estate, parking it exactly where I found it. I wiped the steering wheel and the door handle to remove my prints. I snuck back into the house, moving like a shadow through the kitchen. As I passed the refrigerator, I saw a note stuck to the door with a magnet. It was in Lydia's handwriting. Menu for Thanksgiving: roast turkey, cranberry sauce, champagne. I took a pen from the counter and added one item to the bottom of the list in shaky, jagged letters mimicking my fake dementia. Justice. Then I crept back up to the guest room, took off the coveralls, and slid under the cold sheets. My heart was racing, but my mind was at peace. The trap was set. The legal landmines were buried. All I had to do now was wait for them to step on the trigger. I looked at the ceiling, imagining the scene next week. They would be dressed in their finest clothes, raising their glasses to their own cleverness. And I would be sitting there, the Trojan horse in their midst, ready to open the gates and let the fire rain down. 4 days. I just had to survive 4 more days. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in a week, I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The sleep of a man who knows he's already won the war, even if the enemy is still marching. Thanksgiving arrived not with the warmth of family, but with the cold precision of a military operation. The dining room was set for 12. The finest china, the one with the gold rim that my grandmother had brought over from England, was laid out on the mahogany table. Crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier. In the center of the table sat a 20-pound turkey roasted to golden perfection. It looked delicious. It smelled like sage and butter. But as I sat at the head of the table staring at the bird, I felt like I was looking at a carcass. And I knew that if I was not careful, the vultures sitting around me would be picking my bones clean by dessert. The guests had arrived promptly at 6. There was Dr. Sterling, the man who had sold his medical oath for a bribe, wearing a suit that was too shiny for the occasion. There was the junior lawyer, a nervous young man named Mr. Blight, who kept checking his watch as if he had a plane to catch. There was my cousin Martha, a well-meaning but gossipy woman who had been invited solely to serve as a credible witness to my decline. And of course, there were the stars of the show. Lydia looked stunning in a red dress the color of fresh blood. Preston wore a velvet blazer, playing the role of the grieving yet strong brother to perfection. I sat in my wheelchair. I did not need a wheelchair. My legs were as strong as ever. But the wheelchair was a nice touch. It made me look smaller, weaker. I sat slumped to one side, a napkin tucked into my collar like a bib. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I stared at the candles with a vacant, glassy expression. "Victor, look who is here," Lydia said loudly, as if I were deaf. "It is Cousin Martha. Do you remember Martha?" I blinked slowly, turning my head with a mechanical stiffness. "Martha," I mumbled. "Did you bring the cat?" Martha's face fell. "Oh, poor Victor," she whispered to Preston. "I do not have a cat. I have never had a cat." Preston sighed, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "It comes and goes, Martha. Some days he thinks he is back in the Navy. Some days he thinks we are running a zoo. We just play along. It keeps him calm." Dinner was a torture session of hushed conversations and pitying glances. They talked about me as if I were a piece of furniture. They talked about the tragedy of my condition. They talked about how brave Lydia was for caring for me. I watched Leo from beneath my heavy eyelids. He was sitting at the far end of the table, pushing peas around his plate. He looked terrified. He was playing his part well, but I could see the tension in his small shoulders. He knew that tonight was the night. He knew that the man sitting in the wheelchair was not a vegetable but a coiled spring waiting to snap. Preston stood up to make a toast. He raised his glass of vintage Cabernet. "I want to propose a toast," he said, his voice thick with fake emotion. "To family. In times of darkness, family is the only light we have. My brother Victor built this empire. He built this life. And though his mind has drifted, his legacy remains. We are here tonight, not just to give thanks, but to promise him that we will protect what he built. To Victor." To Victor, the guests chorused, raising their glasses. I let out a loud, sudden laugh. It was a jarring sound. "The bird is burning!" I shouted, pointing at the turkey. "The bird is on fire! Call the firemen!" Lydia rushed to my side, dabbing my mouth with a napkin. "Shh, Victor. It is okay. The turkey is not burning. It is just dinner." I swatted her hand away. "I want ice cream," I demanded petulantly. Soon, darling, soon, Lydia soothed. But first we have a little business to take care of. Just a small thing, and then you can have all the ice cream you want. She signaled to Mr. Blight. The lawyer reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents bound in a blue folder. The sound of the heavy paper hitting the table silenced the room. This is the moment. The trap was springing. Preston walked over to me. He knelt down beside the wheelchair so he was at eye level. He smelled of scotch and arrogance. "Victor," he said softly, using his best salesman voice, "we need to help you with the company. You know how stressful it is. The bills, the contracts, the employees. It is too much for you right now. We want you to rest. We want you to sit in the garden and watch the ocean." He placed a pen in my hand. It was a heavy Mont Blanc fountain pen. My pen. "Lydia and I are going to take the burden off your shoulders," Preston continued. "All you have to do is sign this paper. It just says that you trust us to drive the car for a while. That is all." Mr. Blight opened the folder to the last page. There was a line labeled Grantor Signature. Below it in fine print were the words, "Irrevocable power of attorney and transfer of assets." I looked at the paper. I looked at the pen. I let my hand shake violently. The pen rattled against the paper, making small ink blots. I do not understand," I stammered. "Is this my report card?" Preston's smile faltered for a second, but he recovered quickly. "No, Victor. It is a permission slip, like for a field trip. Just sign your name, right there on the line." I looked around the room. Martha was dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Dr. Sterling was nodding encouragingly. Lydia was biting her lip and her eyes locked on the pen. They were all holding their breath. They were already spending the money in their heads. I lowered the pen to the paper. My hand was shaking so bad that I could barely hold the instrument. I started to make a mark, a jagged line. Lydia leaned in closer. "That is it, honey. Just write Victor Thorne. V-I-C." I stopped. The shaking stopped. In an instant, my hand became rock steady. The transition was so abrupt that Preston, who was holding the edge of the folder, frowned in confusion. I sat up straight in the wheelchair. I rolled my neck, releasing the tension. The slackness in my jaw vanished. The glassy look in my eyes sharpened into a glare of cold, focused hatred. I gripped the pen. I did not sign my name. Instead, I pressed the nib hard into the paper, scratching loudly in the silence of the room. I wrote 3 words in large block letters. The sound of the pen tearing into the fiber of the paper was like a knife sharpening on stone. I wrote slowly, deliberately. Preston leaned in to see what I was doing. What is that?" he asked. "That is not your name. I finished the last letter with a flourish. I dropped the pen onto the table. It rolled and hit the crystal glass with a clear chime. I looked up. I looked Preston directly in the eyes. And then I smiled. It was not the smile of a senile old man. It was the smile of the shark that had eaten the other sharks. "Read it," I said. My voice was clear, strong, and commanding. The voice of the CEO. The voice of the patriarch. Preston looked down at the paper. His face went pale. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Lydia snatched the folder. She looked at the signature line. Her eyes widened in horror. She gasped, dropping the folder as if it were burning hot. The guests leaned in confused. "What does it say?" Martha asked. Lydia backed away from me, knocking over her chair. She looked at me with pure terror. On the line where I was supposed to sign away my life, I had written in bold, unshakable letters, "I know everything." Preston snatched the blue folder from the table with a violence that sent a crystal wineglass tipping over. Red wine spilled across the white tablecloth, spreading like a fresh gunshot wound, but no one moved to clean it up. Every pair of eyes in the room was locked on him as he stared at the words I had just carved into the legal document. His face, which had been flushed with the arrogance of victory, a moment ago drained of color, instantly turning a sickly shade of gray. He looked like a man who had opened a door expecting a party and found a firing squad instead. He crumpled the paper in his fist, his knuckles turning white. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a strangled wheeze. "It is nothing," he stammered, looking around at the guests with wide, manic eyes. It is just gibberish." "See? The dementia. He is scribbling nonsense. He does not know what he is doing. Dr. Sterling, tell them. Tell them this is just a symptom." Dr. Sterling wiped sweat from his upper lip. He looked at me, then at Preston, then at the door. He was calculating his odds of escape. "Yes," the doctor said, his voice cracking. "Agitation. Confusion. It is typical. We should perhaps sedate him before he hurts himself." Lydia lunged forward, grabbing my arm. Her fingernails dug into my flesh through the fabric of my suit. "You are right," she hissed. "He is having an episode. Get the syringe, doctor. We need to calm him down now." She was trying to physically push me back into the wheelchair, trying to force the invalid mask back onto my face. But she was pushing against a mountain. I did not move. I did not flinch. Instead, I slowly peeled her fingers off my arm one by one. I held her wrist for a moment, letting her feel the strength of my grip. The grip of a man who chopped wood and built skyscrapers, not the grip of a dying geriatric. I let go of her hand with a dismissive flick. Then I placed my hands on the armrests of the wheelchair. I pushed myself up. I did not struggle. I did not wobble. I rose steadily, smoothly, unfolding my full height of 6 feet 2 inches. I stood there, straightening my spine, rolling my shoulders back, shedding the stoop I had faked for days. The transformation was physical, but it was also psychological. The fog cleared from my eyes, instantly replaced by a sharp, cold intelligence that swept the room like a searchlight. I adjusted my cufflinks. I smoothed the front of my jacket. And then I spoke. My voice was no longer the high-pitched mumble of a confused old man. It was the deep baritone that had commanded boardrooms for 40 years. "Sit down, Lydia," I said. The command cracked like a whip in the silent room. Lydia stumbled back, her mouth falling open. She collapsed into her chair, not because she wanted to, but because her legs gave out. Victor Preston whispered, backing away until he hit the sideboard. You can stand." "I can do a lot more than stand, brother," I said, stepping away from the wheelchair and kicking it aside. It rolled across the floor and crashed into the wall. "I can see, I can hear, and I can smell. And right now I smell a rat. Actually, I smell 2 rats and a very corrupt doctor." I walked around the table, slowly making eye contact with every single guest. Cousin Martha was pressing a napkin to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Mr. Blight, the young lawyer, looked like he was about to vomit into his briefcase. "You all came here tonight for a show," I said, pacing behind Preston's chair. "You came to watch the old lion die so the jackals could feast. You thought I was deaf. You thought I was blind. You thought I was stupid." I stopped behind Preston and leaned down, whispering into his ear. "I enjoyed the crepes, Preston. But you really should check for cameras before you flush your cancer medication down the toilet. And by the way, the loan sharks called. They are very impatient." Preston whipped around, terror distorting his handsome face. You were spying on me. That is illegal." I laughed. A cold, hard sound. "Sue me," I said. "Oh, wait, you cannot. Because you are going to be very busy for the next 20 years. Lydia stood up, her hands shaking. "Victor, stop this," she pleaded, her voice trembling with desperation. "You are not well. You are imagining things. We love you. We were just trying to help you." "Help me," I repeated, mocking her tone. "You tried to poison me with my own wine. You gaslit me into thinking I was crazy. You stole $500,000 from my accounts. Is that your definition of love, Lydia?" She froze. The mention of the poison hit her like a physical blow. She knew there was no coming back from that. But I was not done. The financial crimes, the attempted murder, those were for the courts. What I was about to do next was for me. It was for the soul of the family. I turned my back on them and looked at the end of the table. Leo was sitting there. He had not moved. He was gripping his fork so hard, his knuckles were white. He was looking at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. He had seen the transformation. He had seen his father return from the dead. I walked over to him. The room watched in breathless silence. I knelt down so I was eye to eye with the boy. I put a hand on his shoulder. "It is time, Leo," I said softly. "Remember our deal. Remember the fishing trip." Leo nodded. He took a deep breath. He swallowed hard. I stood up and turned him around to face the guests, to face Preston and Lydia. "Leo," I said, my voice ringing out clearly, "I want you to tell everyone in this room what your Uncle Preston and your mother told you to do tonight." Preston stepped forward, holding out a hand. "Do not bring the boy into this, Victor," he warned, his voice rising in panic. "He is a child. He does not know what he is saying." "Let him speak," I roared. My voice shook the crystal in the cabinets. I looked back at Leo. "Go ahead, son. Tell them. What did Uncle Preston practice with you in the East Wing this afternoon? What were you supposed to say to the police if I died tonight?" Leo looked at Preston. Preston glared back, a look of pure menace, a silent threat promising pain. But Leo looked at me, and he saw the fortress I had promised him. Leo stood up. He looked small in his blazer, but his voice was steady. "He told me to say that Daddy was sad," Leo said. A gasp went through the room. Cousin Martha let out a sob. "He told me," Leo continued, his voice gaining strength, "that if Daddy went to sleep and did not wake up, I had to tell the police that Daddy had been crying a lot, that he missed Grandma, and that he took too many pills because he wanted to go to heaven to be with her, suicide. They had planned to stage my suicide. It was cleaner than a heart attack. It explained the overdose. It closed the case quickly." Lydia covered her face with her hands. "No. No, that is not true," she wailed. "He is lying. He is a confused child." Leo was not finished. He turned his eyes to Lydia, and then he dropped the bomb that would destroy her completely. "And Uncle Preston promised me," Leo said, his voice trembling slightly with the weight of the secret. "He promised me that if I was a good boy and said the right words to the police, he would let me meet my real mother." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum before an explosion. Lydia's head snapped up. Her face was a mask of sheer horror. What Preston whispered, looking at Lydia. "You told me she was dead. You told me the mother died in childbirth." Lydia looked trapped. Her eyes darted around the room. "She is dead," Lydia shrieked. "She is dead. You are lying, Leo. Who told you that?" Leo reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small, crumpled photograph. It was old, black and white. "Uncle Preston gave me this," Leo said, holding it up. "He said, 'This is my mom.' And he said, 'You are keeping her away from me.'" Lydia stared at the photo. It was a picture of her younger sister. The sister who had vanished years ago. The sister whose child Lydia had stolen to trap a wealthy husband. "You fool," Lydia screamed, lunging at Preston. "You gave him the photo. You told him. You promised we would never speak of her." Preston backed away, hands raised. "I had to offer him something, Lydia. The kid needed a reason to cooperate. I didn't think he would snitch." And there it was, the confession. In their panic, they had turned on each other, tearing apart their own web of lies. They had admitted to the coercion. They had admitted to the kidnapping. They had admitted to everything. I stood there, arms crossed, watching them destroy each other. It was more satisfying than any lawsuit. "You are finished," I said calmly. "Both of you." Lydia turned on me, her eyes wild. She grabbed a steak knife from the table. "You ruined everything," she screamed. "You were supposed to just die. Why wouldn't you just die?" She raised the knife. The guests screamed. Dr. Sterling ducked under the table. But before she could take a step, a sound cut through the chaos. Wail, wail, wail. It started faint, then grew louder and louder, until it filled the room, drowning out Lydia's screams. Blue and red lights began to flash against the dining room windows, casting chaotic shadows across the feast. I checked my watch. 7:30 p.m. Harrison was right on time. I looked at Lydia, still holding the knife, looking like a trapped animal. I looked at Preston, who had slumped into a chair, his head in his hands. I walked over to the window and pulled back the curtain. The driveway was filled with police cruisers. SWAT officers were already moving toward the front door. I turned back to my family. "It seems your ride is here," I said. "I hope you packed light. Where you are going, they do not allow evening gowns." The front door crashed open. Boots thundered down the hallway. "Police! Everybody down!" I looked at Leo. I winked. "We did it, partner," I whispered. "Now the real cleanup begins." The dinner party was officially over. The sound of heavy boots on the hardwood floor replaced the polite clinking of silverware. Uniformed officers flooded the room, their weapons drawn, but pointed low, moving with the efficiency of a tide sweeping away garbage. Dr. Sterling was already on his knees, his hands interlocked behind his head, sobbing something about peer pressure. Mr. Blight, the young lawyer, looked as if he had fainted in his chair, his face blending perfectly with the white tablecloth. But I did not look at them. My eyes were fixed on the two architects of my misery. Preston and Lydia stood frozen near the sideboard, trapped between the window and a wall of police officers. Harrison Graves walked into the room, stepping over the spilled wine with the grace of a man who cleans up messes for a living. He carried a black leather briefcase. He walked straight to me and handed me a single red folder. "Thank you, Harrison," I said, taking the file. "I have the warrants," Victor Harrison replied, his voice calm amidst the chaos. "Fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit murder. And thanks to the drive you gave me, we also have solicitation." I nodded. "But I am not done, Harrison. There is one more charge. The one that started it all." I turned to face Lydia. She was trembling, her face a mask of ruined mascara and terror. She looked at the police, then she looked at me, her eyes pleading for a mercy she did not deserve. "Victor, please," she stammered. "I can explain. It was Preston. He forced me. He said we needed the money." "Money," I interrupted, walking slowly toward her. "You think this is about money?" "No, Lydia. The money was just the grease on the wheels. This is about a boy." I opened the red folder. Inside was a birth certificate. The real one. Not the forgery she had framed in the nursery upstairs. 12 years ago, you came to me and told me you were pregnant," I said, my voice echoing in the silent room. "You wore the padding. You faked the morning sickness. You played the role of the glowing, expectant mother perfectly. And then you went away for a private confinement in Europe. You came back with a baby boy. You placed him in my arms, and I cried tears of joy. I thought God had finally blessed me." Lydia was shaking her head violently. "Stop it, Victor. Don't do this in front of them." But it was all a lie, I continued, my voice rising. "You were never pregnant. You could never get pregnant. You needed an heir to secure your position in this family because you knew I was thinking of divorcing you back then. So you and Preston made a deal." I pointed at Preston, who was looking at the floor, sweat dripping from his nose. "Preston had a mistress," I said. "A young waitress named Sarah. She got pregnant. Preston didn't want the baby, but he saw an opportunity. He offered Sarah money to disappear, but Sarah didn't want money. She wanted her son. I took a step closer to Lydia. So you took him. You didn't adopt him, Lydia. You stole him. You paid off a corrupt clinic to falsify the records. You took a screaming infant from his mother's arms, and you brought him here to be a prop in your play. You made him a thorn, not because you loved him, but because you needed a human shield to protect your access to my bank account. Lydia let out a high-pitched wail. She was an addict, she screamed. She was unfit. I saved him. I gave him a life of luxury. I am his mother. You are a kidnapper, I roared. And you are a fraud. But here is the part you do not know, Lydia. I looked at Preston. He flinched. He knew what was coming. Preston told you that Sarah died of an overdose a year later, didn't he? He told you the loose end was tied up. He told you that you were safe because the only witness was 6 feet under. Lydia looked at Preston. He promised me, she whispered. He showed me the obituary. He lied, I said. Just like he lied to me. Just like he lied to Leo. I pulled a photograph from the folder. It was a recent picture of a woman with sad eyes sitting in a garden. Sarah is alive, Lydia. She is not dead. She is in a mental health facility in Vermont. Preston has been paying her bills for 12 years, not out of kindness, but as hush money. He kept her alive as an insurance policy. In case you ever tried to cut him out of the deal, he could threaten to reveal the truth and send you to prison for kidnapping. Lydia froze. The reality of the betrayal washed over her. She had been Preston's partner, but she had also been his puppet. He had held a gun to her head for 12 years without her even knowing it. You lied to me, Lydia whispered. Her voice was barely audible, but it carried the weight of a nuclear explosion. Preston backed away, his hands raised. Lydia, listen, he pleaded. I did it for us. I had to keep leverage. You know how you are. You would have thrown me aside the moment you got the inheritance. I needed security. You let me believe I was safe, Lydia screamed, her hands curled into claws. You let me live in fear of a ghost when she was alive the whole time. She lunged. It happened so fast the officers didn't have time to react. Lydia threw herself at Preston, not with the slap of a scorned woman, but with the fury of a cornered beast. She raked her nails down his face, drawing deep lines of blood. She grabbed his hair, pulling with a strength born of pure madness. You bastard, she shrieked. You ruined my life. Preston roared in pain and shoved her back. He raised his fist to strike her, his face twisted into a snarl of violence. Get off me, you crazy witch, he yelled. Before he could land the punch, a SWAT officer tackled him. Preston hit the floor with a bone-jarring thud. 2 more officers grabbed Lydia, dragging her back as she kicked and screamed, spitting curses at the man she had conspired with just minutes ago. Preston struggled against the handcuffs. Get off me, I am Preston Thorne, he shouted. That old man is lying. He is the crazy one. I stood over him. I looked down at my brother lying on the expensive rug, his nose bleeding, his velvet jacket torn. You are not Preston Thorne anymore, I said coldly. You are inmate number 8940. The officers hauled him to his feet. He looked at me, his eyes wild with hate. I should have killed you when I had the chance, he spat. I should have used a gun instead of that stupid powder. The confession was loud and clear. Harrison Graves nodded to the police captain. That is all we needed, Harrison said. Take them away. I watched as they were dragged out the front door. Lydia was still sobbing incoherent pleas for mercy, blaming Preston for everything. Preston was cursing, swearing vengeance on me and the world. They looked pathetic. They looked small. The monsters that had terrified my son were just 2 broken, greedy people who had turned on each other the moment the darkness fell. The door slammed shut. The flashing lights continued to strobe through the window, but the screaming had stopped. The room fell into a heavy silence. The guests were gone, ushered out by the police to give statements. It was just me, Harrison, and Leo. I felt a sudden wave of exhaustion hit me. It wasn't the physical fatigue of the acting. It was a spiritual hollowness. I had won. I had destroyed my enemies. I had saved my fortune. But I had also lost the illusion of the family I thought I had. I was standing in a mansion that felt more like a museum of a dead life. I looked at the spilled wine. I looked at the broken chair. "It is over," Harrison said softly, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You did it, Victor." I nodded slowly. I felt empty. A strange, hollow feeling in my chest where the anger used to be. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the cold reality of starting over at 70 years old. But then I felt a small hand slip into mine. I looked down. Leo was standing there. He was looking at the door where Preston and Lydia had disappeared. Then he looked up at me. His eyes were clear. The fear that had haunted them for days was gone. "Are they coming back?" he asked quietly. "No, son," I said, squeezing his hand. "They are never coming back." Leo took a deep breath. He didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He just leaned his head against my arm. "Can we have ice cream now?" he asked. "Like you said." I looked at him, and for the first time that night, a genuine smile touched my lips. It wasn't the smile of a tycoon or a vengeful god. It was just the smile of a dad. "Yes, Leo," I said. "We can have all the ice cream in the world." I turned my back on the ruin of the dinner party. I walked toward the kitchen, holding the hand of the only person who mattered. The war was over. The silence was not empty anymore. It was peaceful. And in that peace I knew that even though I had lost a wife and a brother, I had gained something far more precious. I had gained the truth. And the truth, as painful as it was the only foundation worth building on. The salt air of the Connecticut coastline has always smelled like clarity to me. It clears the lungs and sharpens the mind. For the past month, I have spent a lot of time sitting here on this weathered wooden dock, staring at the gray horizon where the water meets the sky. It is quiet now. The mansion on the hill behind us is finally silent. The police tape is gone. The lawyers have stopped calling every hour. The tabloid reporters who camped out at the gate for 2 weeks, hoping for a glimpse of the scandalous Thorne family, have finally moved on to the next tragedy. I looked down at the boy sitting beside me. Leo was dangling his legs over the edge of the pier, his sneakers hovering just inches above the dark water. He was wearing a new jacket, one that fit him perfectly, not a hand-me-down from a cousin or a cheap, impulsive buy from Lydia. He looked different. The shadows under his eyes had faded. The flinch in his shoulders whenever an adult raised a voice was slowly disappearing. But he was still quiet. He was still processing the earthquake that had leveled his world. I reached into the inside pocket of my coat. I pulled out a thick envelope. It was heavy. It felt heavier than the deed to the estate. It felt heavier than the gun I had almost used that night in the hallway. "Leo," I said, my voice soft but firm against the sound of the crashing waves. "I have something for you." Leo turned his head. He looked at the envelope, and for a split second I saw a flash of the old fear. He thought it was bad news. He thought it was a letter from prison. He thought it was a bill. "It is not from them," I assured him, handing it over. "Go ahead. Open it." Leo took the envelope with both hands. He slid his finger under the flap and pulled out the stack of documents. They were crisp and white, stamped with the official seal of the state of Connecticut. He read the title page. His lips moved silently as he sounded out the legal words. "Certificate of adoption." He froze. He read it again. Then he looked up at me, his eyes wide and searching. "What does this mean?" he asked, his voice trembling. I shifted on the bench, turning to face him fully. I took off my sunglasses so he could see my eyes. So he could see that there was no deception here, no acting, no hidden agendas. "It means that as of 9 o'clock this morning, you are officially my son," I said. "Not my nephew, not my ward, my son." It means that no matter what blood runs in your veins, the law says you belong to me, and I belong to you. Leo looked back down at the paper. He traced his name with his finger. Leo Thorne. But, he hesitated, biting his lip. But Uncle Preston said that since he is my biological father, I am just a mistake. He said you would never really want me because I am not yours. I felt a flash of that old cold anger, the same rage that had fueled my revenge. But I pushed it down. Preston was in a cell awaiting trial. He could not hurt us anymore. Leo, look at me. He looked up. Preston provided biology, I said. He provided DNA. That is a chemical transaction, Leo. It does not make a father. A father is the man who stays. A father is the man who teaches you how to tie your shoes. A father is the man who sits by your bed when you have a fever and who cheers the loudest when you strike out at baseball because he is just proud you stood at the plate. I reached out and placed my hand on his shoulder. It was a solid grip, a promise in physical form. Blood creates relatives, I told him, but loyalty creates family. You saved my life, Leo. You could have stayed silent. You could have taken the easy way out. You could have chosen the side that terrified you. But you didn't. You chose to protect the old man who you thought was losing his mind. You showed more character in 5 minutes than your biological parents showed in 50 years. Leo's eyes filled with tears. But they were not tears of fear. They were tears of relief. The kind of tears that wash away the grime of the past. So you are not going to send me away, he asked one last time, needing to hear it. I smiled. It was the only genuine smile I had worn in years. I am spending the rest of my life building a future for you, I said. Everything I have, the company, the house, the legacy, it is all yours. But more importantly, that I am going to be here. I am going to teach you how to be a man, a good man, a man who values truth over money and loyalty over power. Leo dropped the papers and threw his arms around me. He buried his face in my chest. I held him tight. I felt his small heart beating against my own. It was a rhythm of life, a rhythm of hope. We sat there for a long time just holding on to each other while the seagulls circled overhead. The wind was cold, but I felt warm. For the first time in a long time, I did not feel like a target. I felt like a shield. Okay, partner, I said, patting his back. Enough sentimental stuff. We have work to do. Leo pulled back, wiping his eyes. Work! I pointed to the fishing rods leaning against the railing. Those fish are not going to catch themselves, I said, standing up. And I seem to remember you owe me a rematch from our last trip. Leo laughed. A real laugh. It sounded like music. You are on, old man, he said, grinning. We baited our hooks and cast our lines into the water. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. I watched the bobbers floating on the surface, rising and falling with the tide. I thought about Lydia sitting in her cell, blaming everyone but herself. I thought about Preston pacing his cage, realizing that his greed had cost him the very freedom he tried to steal from me. They were the past. They were lessons learned in the hardest way possible. But looking at Leo standing there focused and determined, I saw the future. I realized then that my life did not end at 70. It was just beginning. I had a second chance, a chance to do it right. A chance to build something that would last longer than steel and concrete. I leaned back on the bench and took a deep breath of the salty air. Let them have their schemes, I thought. Let them have their lies. I have the boy. I have the truth. And I have a fishing pole. And for a man who has seen the darkest corners of the human heart, that is more than enough. The sun dipped below the horizon, marking the end of the day and the end of the story. But as the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, I knew that for Victor and Leo Thorne, the dawn was just around the corner. We fished until the moon came up. We didn't catch much, just a few small flounders that we threw back. But we weren't really fishing for fish. We were fishing for peace. And out there on the dark water, under the watchful eye of the universe, we caught plenty of it. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my story, from the betrayal and the poison and the courtroom drama, it is this: trust is the most expensive currency in the world. Do not give it away cheaply. People will tell you they love you. They will share your bed. They will eat your food. They will smile to your face while holding a knife behind their back. Do not trust words. Words are easy. Trust actions. Trust the people who show up when you are broken, not just when you are rich. Trust the people who tell you the truth even when it hurts. And never ever ignore your gut instinct. If something feels wrong, it is wrong. If the wine tastes bitter, do not drink it. If the smile doesn't reach the eyes, do not believe it. Protect yourself. Protect your heart. And if you find yourself surrounded by snakes, do not be afraid to become the mongoose. You are stronger than you think. You are smarter than they know. And you have the right to survive. Thank you for listening to my story. It was not easy to tell, but it was necessary. If my experience has opened your eyes or given you the courage to look closer at your own circle, then it was worth it. Please take a moment to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. I have more stories to tell, more lessons to share. And I want to hear from you. Have you ever been betrayed by someone close to you? How did you handle it? Did you fight back or did you walk away? Let me know in the comments below. Your story might just help someone else who is suffering in silence. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your family close, but keep your enemies closer. This is Victor Thorne signing off. Stay safe and stay strong.